Well, I want to welcome everybody here this afternoon to our celebration in the auditorium to begin with. My name is Shala Wilson Ashworth. I am the Director of Operations for the Pennacrest Museums. The Pennacrest Museums is a combination of the Old Capitol Museum and the Museum of Natural History. And we have been extremely fortunate to have the five gentlemen in front of us return so that we can chat and bend their ear a little bit about how they put together this extraordinary exhibit that we have downstairs 25 years ago. So I'm going to just give some brief introductions and then we will start some questions. First we have Duane Anderson, who served as, and I apologize if I'm trying to catch my breath, I started the morning at a conference in Ames. And I got back to campus at 2 o'clock. So I'm shifting gears in my head. Duane Anderson was the director of the Office of the State Archaeology Office here at the University of Iowa during the Iowa Hall renovation or construction. He spent 20 years in Iowa, served as director of Sanford Museum and Planetarium. After he finished his tenure here at the university, he moved on to the Natural History in Ohio and School of American Research in Santa Fe, where he served as vice president and director of the Indian Arts Research Center. In 2000, he assumed directorship to the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture Lab of Anthropology in Santa Fe, and he is retired and spends most of his time in the Southwest. And I think this might be his first time back to campus in a number of years.
24.
That'd be a number of years. So Duane, welcome back. Next to Duane is Holmes Semken. Holmes is a fixture on campus. Many of us on the Pennacrest, sorry Holmes.
Said about me in ages.
Many of us on the Pennacrest and in the Trowbridge Gilmore Hall area see Holmes quite frequently. Holmes is a professor emeritus in paleontology. If I say something wrong, please correct me. At the time that Iowa Hall was being constructed, he was professor in geology. So he's a professor emeritus in geoscience, excuse me. He also currently is extremely involved in Artarchio's Sloth Valley expedition, which is another wonderful story. So after the reception, bend his ear about that too. Next to Holmes is Jeffry Schabilion. Jeff is recently retired, and I'm sure we'll see him as a fixture on campus too. Jeff was a professor in biology and was involved with the project from the biological standpoint. Will Thomson came to the university. Oh dear. Where'd that sheet go? Oh, Will, you've been here.
I wandered into town in 1982.
1982, thank you, Will. And became part of the Museum Studies program at the University of Iowa, teaching and directing the exhibits, and was very instrumental in the exhibit. Oh dear, George is looking at me confused. Let me double check. Exhibit design artist, excuse me. There we go. Teaching exhibit design and directing or working on that part of the aspect of Iowa Hall. And Will had taught in the program for a number of years. He is now retired, lives here in the Iowa City area, as does Holmes and Jeff. And finally, we have George Schrimper, the former director of the Museum of Natural History, who came to the university in the 60s?
1960 as a student, yes.
1960 as a student, and did not retire until 1998. 2000. George has had a long and wonderful tenure here at the University of Iowa and was the head of this group to put this campaign together and to build this gallery that we have now, that we cherish. He also headed up the Museum Studies program during his time here. So we're going to start. We handed out some index cards, and this is mainly a time, to keep time going. For you to write down a question that you may think would be fun to ask that we don't get a chance or I think of to ask. And a few of our staff will just quietly go around and pick them up, and we will try to get as many asked as we can. But when we run out of time, there will be the reception for you to continue asking and enjoying the knowledge that these five gentlemen carry. So George, if you would begin by telling us why. Why build an exhibit about the history of the environment of Iowa in the middle of McBride Hall in the 1980s?
Well, first of all, Shell, I would like to thank you and Vice President for Research, Jordan Cohen, Ann Ricketts, for your kindness in inviting us today. It's terrific to be back with the old gang, and you know, I feel kind of like this is a rock and roll band, almost resurrected resurrected from the 1970s, and we're back for one more gig. And I hope it's not the last. But I did have an occasion with Holmes and Jeff to walk through Iowa Hall on Monday of this week, and just to sort of let the memories come back. And a wonderful experience. And of course, you're probably looking for some interesting anecdotes about Iowa Hall, and probably the best ones are ones that we can't tell. But why build this museum gallery in the center of McBride Hall? Well, the idea for Iowa Hall is actually embedded in the architectural history of McBride Hall. It goes back to 1904, even before, when Charles Nutting, who was curator of the museum from 1886 to 1927, envisioned what he called a modern new building on campus with a museum in its center. And we were always aware of that historical record. Now, obviously, that space had been utilized for the university library, even as McBride Hall was open to the public in 1904. And Cindy has written a wonderful book about museum history, and you can gain much more information about that background for it. But we also have another historical record for the intention to build what is called the Iowa Room. And I happen to bring it with me today. And there was a letter from Charles Nutting written in 1913 to then President John Bowman. And Charles Nutting wrote, "It is hoped that the library will be moved out of its present quarters and the main reading room will be available for the Iowa Room." And that's in all capital letters, which I hope to be the real focal point of the entire museum. Here, the director of the exhibit of vertebrates, and he was then referring to Homer Dill, would have a chance to carry out his admirable ideas on a large and very effective scale, and the present curator, meaning Nutting, speaking for himself, would be inclined to give him a free hand in planning and carrying into effect the whole scheme of the Iowa Room. And so we have this long record of intent. We became aware in 1978 the space was again being reviewed, and it was then that we had advanced an alternative plan for the development. We wanted to have a space where the objects, the specimens, very special to Iowa, that had been stored away, used for research in repository collections, could be brought forth. We also wanted to focus institutional attention on the east portico entrance and to reclaim this original intent. And so what we produced was essentially an illustrated walk through time, sequentially linking exhibits by theme, by space, and by chronology. And it really put it all together. But that was the basic intent. Maybe I've given you more history than I should have.
Never. You did a lovely job. Thank you, George. I think it'd be wonderful if each of you, because we do have such a short amount of time, I think, ladies and gentlemen, we could sit all afternoon and listen to the stories these gentlemen have, even the ones that maybe we shouldn't hear, but would be great to hear anyway. But if each of you could take a few moments, boil it down to 7 minutes, and tell what you did, how you worked, what your part is that you played in this, the building of this gallery. So, Duane, I'm going to put you on the spot and let you go first.
Rather than go back over the overall history, since I was involved mainly with the cultural sequence. Can you hear me better with this?
Yeah.
Since I was involved with the cultural sequence, I thought I'd give you a little bit of context and background. In other words, what was going on back in the 80s and the late 70s that might be of interest now. For one thing, the state had a lot of problems with Native Americans and with burials that were being recovered, exhibits of human skeletal remains. And so all the archaeologists and the state agencies that were affected got together and passed a law in 1976 that turned out to be the first law in the country specifically designed to protect ancient burial grounds. And I bring this up because in order to manage this program and to implement it, we had to have a very strong Indian Advisory Committee. And it turned out that we had many issues and many problems around the state to deal with, and this committee was very helpful. So they were ready-made for duty in a project that involved something besides ancient grave sites. And the committee members included Yankton Sioux, Maria Pearson, Running Moccasins was the name she went by, Jean Rave, who was a Winnebago, and Don Wanatee, who is a Meskwaki. And we interested Don in this project because one of the key elements of this sequence was the Meskwaki exhibition. At that time, AIM, American Indian Movement, was active. They were ripping up archaeological sites and condemning various institutions for their displays and so forth. And there was a sentiment among Indians in general that they didn't want to be displayed in a natural history museum. They didn't want to be treated like animals. And so we thought, well, there's a problem to start with. And yet the Meskwakis had a different view of this. They considered themselves to be part of nature, and they welcomed the idea of being featured in with nature in a natural history museum setting. They had further motivation, and that was basically the old Capitol, where Governor Grimes was the territorial governor. They were given permission to buy their land where their settlement currently is over at Tama and leave the reservation in Kansas, which they really didn't like. So the Pentecrest area had special significance. The old Capitol had special significance to the Meskwaki. So that's how we kind of got into this. Now the Meskwakis were a big help in working with the exhibit because even though there were very capable people working with the exhibits themselves, like the Deatons who are here, were very instrumental in making the thing live that you see now. But behind the scenes, we were getting advice from the Meskwakis on how to dress people, what the houses ought to look like, what they would be doing, what time of the year, what year should actually be featured, a time when the Meskwakis were being rounded up and put on the reservation, but where family groups were still roaming the Iowa River Valley and other valleys in the state who had escaped being rounded up by the troops. And we said, well, we want to find somebody from the settlement who would be willing to have their face cast and their body used in this diorama. And they said, no, we don't want anybody right now. We want somebody out of the past. We want you to take the McKinney Hall Portrait Gallery pictures, the George Inman reproductions, where you actually have portraits of people from the 1830s and incorporate them into the exhibits. And we also had other liaisons, Don Wanatee's wife, Priscilla, working behind the scenes, Jonathan Buffalo, the tribal historian,